Chalk marks on the door. In the year 1665, sickness moved through England with a quiet kind of dread. It did not always arrive with shouting. It did not always bring immediate panic. Often it began more softly than that. A fever, a cough, a house with shutters that did not open, a neighbour who was not seen that morning. Then in some streets there came another sign, a mark on the door during the Great Plague. Infected houses were sometimes shut up. The people inside were ordered to remain there. Sometimes a watchman was set nearby. Sometimes food was brought. Sometimes prayers were offered from a distance. But once the sickness was known, the house itself changed in the eyes of everyone around it. It was no longer only a home, it became a warning. One of the most haunting images from that time is the chalk mark said to have been placed on certain doors, a simple cross, sometimes a few words beside it, sometimes the words, "Lord, have mercy upon us." Only a few pale lines in chalk. That was all. And yet it was enough to change the feeling of an entire street. By day, the mark would have stood out against dark wood or worn plaster. It would have caught the eye at once. A passerby might have seen it from halfway down the lane, and before they reached the threshold they would already know. Something inside that house had changed by evening. The mark may have looked stranger still, a pale shape on a darkened door, a warning waiting in the fading light. It is not difficult to imagine the silence around such a place. The neighbouring doors might still open and close. Somewhere further off, a cart might pass. Somewhere beyond the lane, church bells might sound, but near the marked house, people would have lowered their voices. They would have walked more quickly. They would have looked, then looked away. Not because the chalk itself was frightening, because of what it meant. Inside that house, life had not stopped all at once. A chair by the hearth, a coat hanging near the door, cups on a shelf, a loaf left unfinished, the traces of a normal day, and yet the mark outside had already begun to change the meaning of everything within. The house was still lived in, still warm, still occupied, and that made it worse. A graveyard is eerie because it belongs to the dead. A ruined abbey is eerie because it stands empty, but a marked plague house was different. It stood among other houses. It belonged to the same street. It had the same doors, the same windows, the same walls. And yet everyone knew that one threshold now belonged to fear. That may be why the image lingers so strongly. It was not only the disease that frightened people, it was the way it changed familiar things. A doorway, a latch, a knock in the night, a face at the window, a neighbour seen from across the road. Even chalk became part of that dread. Later generations would remember the plague through numbers, through records, through deaths and burials and weekly bills, but the people who lived through it must have remembered smaller things as well. A shutter that stayed closed, a lane that felt quieter than it should have, a door no one wished to pass too closely. And behind it all, the knowledge that the line between safety and sickness could be as thin as a wall. By the time a house was marked, fear had already arrived. The chalk did not create that fear, it gave it a shape. That is what makes the image so enduring. Not because it was elaborate, not because it was theatrical, but because it was simple enough to feel completely real. A rough cross on a door, a short plea for mercy, a narrow street, and the sense that something terrible had entered a home and settled there. Even now, centuries later, it remains one of the coldest symbols of plague, not a battlefield, not a great public scene of panic, not a line of carts in the dark, just a door, just chalk, and the dreadful meaning carried by both.